So we've got this 3rd gen Toyota 4Runner right here. It is a 99 model limited, so it's got the e-locker and all that junk like that. But it's got a pretty bad problem. Just look at the link mounts. That lower mount right there is supposed to be attached to the axle. And if we move over to the upper, it's even worse. Look at that gap.
Brought to you in part by Cranbrook Toyota.
This isn't my personal 4Runner, but as you guys know, we're in the middle of building up my V8 Toyota pickup with the body off frame, 3-link suspension, all that jazz. I figured I'd show you guys a little bit of what I do to kind of afford to keep building these things. Now, I don't always do this. I'm not always looking for like customer builds or things to fix for like cash to keep building projects, but as you guys know, building trucks is expensive. So every little bit helps when it comes to doing, well, pretty major builds like this. So yeah, let's fix it. I'm gonna start by pulling out the rear axle, bringing it into the shop, assessing all the mounts, welding them back on if I can, rebuilding them, and then definitely bracing them. First, I'm gonna use the high lift, and then I'll go from the sides and actually use axle stands under the frame rails, just to have as many points of contact as possible, because obviously I don't want to pull an axle out with just this sketchy situation. Tires off the ground? Yeah, they are. Roll a block underneath, and one of these. We need to go up a hair more. One side, there. Alright, so now that we've got 3 points of contact holding the rear end of the 4Runner up, it's time to start working on getting this axle out of here. So I think I'm gonna start by taking the tires off, because even if the axle is completely disconnected, I don't think it'll roll out and underneath with the tires on. So now that the tires are off, we've got a lot more room to play underneath the deck of this 4Runner. So let's start by removing the brake lines. I'm going to use vice grips, pinch off the soft line, and then I'll remove the hard lines from the T and unbolt that from the axle. There we go. There's one. So when it comes to removing the e-brake cable, it is almost always a pain in the butt, and this one is no exception because it is so rusty. So what I usually do is take that little 4 helio and I'll bend it, and then that'll remove it from the bottom of the pin, and then the top, I'll take a grinder and I'll physically cut the top off and then replace that pin with a bolt. And that is the e-brake disconnected. Okay, we get the e-brake right out of the way. I'm honestly so surprised that none of those bolts broke. Looks like this coil spring's ready to come out. Next up on the list is the ABS wires. Now, it is nearly impossible to get them out of the axle side without completely destroying them. So if you try that, expect to have to replace them. What I like to do is to remove them from the frame side. Right there, that's the plug. So we'll take that one out and the one on the other side, and the ABS will be disconnected. Now for the locker, it's pretty straightforward. There's 2 plugs, one here and one right here. And then lastly, you just need to disconnect the vent, just like that. And now I can take off this 10mm nut there, and the locker is freed from the body harness. Now all the tricky little stuff is disconnected, and we're on to the big easy stuff. That is, remove the links, remove the shocks, and this thing is ready to drop right out of place. Now that the axle's out and I've had a really good look at it here, I'm making an executive decision not to save this axle. I thought I could weld up and make a new upper link and lower link and possibly brace the other stuff, which would have been awesome because I was looking forward to play with my new Yes Welder some more. But look at this spring perch. It is completely rotten and destroyed. I don't think it is even worth my time to try to save this housing. It would take me a fair bit of time to like cut all the crap out and rebuild it just like stock. And I just don't think it's worth my time. So I'm shifting gears and now I'm going to start looking for an axle housing. It doesn't need to be an e-locker housing. I've made videos in the past showing you guys how to put an e-locker in a non-e-locker housing. It's pretty straightforward. So I guess we'll pick up this video when I find another housing.
The next day.
Check it out. We got a new to us axle. It's pretty crusty, but everything on it is intact. The other downside is this is a non-e-locker housing, which luckily for me, I know how to put a e-locker in a non-e-locker housing. I've actually got a video on that on the channel. So we still get to play with the welder. So we'll start by unloading this axle from my truck, and then we'll move on to taking the drums off because I'm going to use the drums from the other axle, and take the third member out because I'm going to use obviously the e-locker third member from the other axle. Get it stripped down before I even bother bringing it in the shop. Oh, why do they make these things so heavy? Yeah. My poor snail armor panel, it is getting like beat to crap. Full of scratches, but it's still in good shape. The e-locker housing and the locker housing are very similar. Most of the factory studs actually work. This here is a gasket for an e-locker. So if we lay this down here, put it in all the studs that line up, so you can see this stud, and this stud all don't line up with holes. And there is no studs for a few holes. So as you can probably guess, it's pretty straightforward. Take out the studs that don't work, then drill brand new holes, and then tap them to accept studs in the correct location. Also, look at this little notch in the gasket that doesn't exist in the housing. This is for the fork off the actuator to actually drop in and engage the locker. So we'll also have to take the grinder and notch this bit of the housing here, and yeah, then everything will fit. So we're gonna start by taking out these two studs. This stud actually broke on me when we were trying to remove the third. So I'm just going to grind that guy flat and then use the stud itself to seal its old hole. Now that we got the studs out of the way, we'll put the gasket back on and it'll sit nice and flat. And I take my marker and I go around this notch in the gasket. Now, if I take the gasket off, I can see exactly where I need to grind out. Now that the notch is cut out and we put the gasket back on, it's time to start placing those new studs. So 2 of these studs actually land like off of the face of this flange. And to solve that, all I do is I build up weld up and around up here. So I'll mark it out like this, right where that stud needs to land. I'll grab my welder and I'll put a couple beads in here just to build out the surface a bit more, and then same with this lower one. we need to fill this a bit with weld just so that we can get a couple of studs in here. Now, we take the grinder and flatten out all this weld to the same plane of the seal mount here. Now, I'm gonna take this other e-locker housing I have and just kind of test fit it in here. And then with the housing installed, I could take a drill bit and I can use the holes that are in the housing that the studs need to go through and use them as kind of a pilot hole. Now I'm going to take my M8 by 125 tap and tap out these holes that we just drilled. And now it's just time to simply install your studs. So the two that are on the actuator side are extra long, and then these two are just normal size studs. So I'll start by giving it some Loctite, threading it in its hole, and into your home. And then, just for fun, let's try reinstalling this. Beautiful! Now that this housing is ready to accept an e-locker, before I start stripping down this one, I want to grind this guy down with a wire wheel, clean it up, and get it painted so that it can start drying while I strip that one down. It's not necessarily warm anymore, so I have a feeling it's going to take a while for paint to dry, so that's why I'm going to prioritize that before I strip that down. I have moved the axle down to this corner of my shop because this is where my wood stove is, and to give the paint the best chance of drying, well, I figured this is the corner to do it in. What I'm doing right now is I'm taking a layer of grease and I am covering the seal surface with it. The reason I'm doing that is because when I use the spray paint, it will not dry to the grease. Just a little trick that I use to keep sealing surfaces free of paint. So here's the deal. I just painted that axle, and I'm looking at the weather report, and tomorrow it looks like we're gonna get some snow. Actually, overnight, we're supposed to get some snow, and it's supposed to be miserable. Today it got up to about 7 degrees. Tomorrow I think it's 2. So if it does snow, it'll probably stick, and we've got maybe an hour of daylight. So I think I'm gonna throw the axle back in, even though it's still technically a little wet on the paint. If we just did rocker guard, so touching it up after won't be an issue. I plan on throwing it in empty anyways, like without the axle shafts and drums and stuff like that, just because it's a lot easier to move around not loaded. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna, let's just throw the axle in. Considering this diff was underneath another 4Runner this morning, I'm pretty stoked on the results. I had to actually pull that diff from another rig before I can even get to work this morning on it. And yeah, we got it stripped down, we got it ready for an e-locker, painted, and then hung back up underneath this 4Runner. I'm pretty stoked. That's a whole lot of work for one day, but it's starting to get dark, it's starting to rain, so I think we'll call it here for now. All right, today is the day that we're gonna finish getting this 4Runner all put back together and back on the road. And it shouldn't take that long. I just gotta strip down everything off this axle, throw it in the axle in the truck, and add some gear oil, bleed the brakes, and we're good for a test drive. It's time to roll around in the dirt and throw that third back in, well, not back in this housing, throw the third from the other diff into the new housing. Remember how earlier I cut the ends off of the fork that grabs the e-brake? That left the little stud or pin thing right here in this fork. Now I'm gonna take a grinder and grind that guy completely flat, drill out the hole that it's in, and then I'll end up throwing a nut and a bolt in place of this for easier serviceability in the future. The e-brake can now be reconnected, so now it's just time to physically slap everything back together. I got mostly everything back together already under here, so yeah, it'll be 100% complete in no time. Well, me and Phoenix got the 4Runner done. It is back on its wheels. I also took it for a test drive. I tested the e-locker. Everything is working awesome. This video didn't go exactly as planned. I did actually want to fix up the axle that came out of the truck, but it was just too far gone. I hope you guys liked it anyways. If you do me a huge favor, smash that thumbs up button, and hey, consider subscribing. I upload weekly Toyota, building, wheeling, and off-roading content. Anyways, I'll catch you next week. Peace.